everyone, and welcome back to the Truth and Dialogue podcast, episode 5. And I'm glad you could join us, all 5 of you. And hopefully, if this goes okay, you guys will share it, and we'll be up to 6 or 7 even, maybe next time. So a little non-follower humor there. So yeah, I'm still getting started, and I'm still probably not doing this very well, but I think the point here is just to keep trying, and like I've said before, go be bad at something, even if it takes a while. I think the important thing is to keep doing it. So that's what I'm doing, and as I've said before, of course, the ultimate direction with the podcast is to have guests and discuss important topics, things that they are familiar with. Maybe they are semi-experts on the topics, and they can offer points of view that all of you have not heard before, and I haven't heard before, and maybe we can discuss those topics, bounce ideas off of each other. We can agree on certain things, we can disagree on certain things, and that would be great. That of course, that would be great to have. But it's not so easy getting guests on a brand new little podcast that, is very like many other podcasts and formats. I won't lie, this is basically modeled after Joe Rogan's podcast and just kind of that overall setup where he just sits down and talks to somebody. So I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan, but I wouldn't lie if I said I wasn't doing, a small form of copycat there. But anyway, no guest today, but I think this is getting me more comfortable with just kind of my own thoughts and my own opinions. And even though there's nobody sitting here, no live audience, it's still a little nerve-wracking for me because this is not something that I'm usually comfortable with. So that is something that makes it worth doing as well for me. So stick with me. I think I have a lot of content here to go over and to review, and I'm hoping to kind of weave in a very important point here and something I want everyone to pay attention to. So one little note, every time I do one of these episodes, I try to do something at least around the house here before I film the episode, so that I'm trying to basically follow one of the rules of the 12 Rules for Life out of Jordan Peterson's book, which is I'm paraphrasing here, but it's basically set your house in perfect order before you tell the world what they should be doing, or it's something like that, right? Basically, take care of your own house before you tell somebody else to take care of their house. And I tried to do that more out of kind of not in a literal sense, as in I go around and repair everything that needs repaired, and I clean everything that needs to be cleaned, and I set the house in true perfect order. But it feels better to actually clean my room, or clean the kitchen, or do a little project, do things like that around the house before I sit down and even remotely get close, to telling anyone out there that happens to be watching or listening, any advice. I try to stay true to the idea of the podcast and not necessarily promote my ideas and what I'm thinking. The whole idea, remember, behind this is to get you to think for yourself, to focus within, take care of whatever it is you need to take care of, make things right in your life, and hopefully that will put you and anybody in a better position to help those immediately around you and those in the world. But sitting here talking only with myself for about an hour or so. Of course, there's going to be some opinions in here. And again, I try to go clean my room or do something small, at least around the house, just to, in a sense, figuratively take care of my house before I tell you how you might take care of yours. So with that being said, I wanted to start by a little story, that another little thing about what I do, something that I do to try to connect kind of the end of the podcast, something I'll go over a little later. But so basically, I forget what it was, last year or so, my wife and I started looking at these kind of old time straight razors for shaving. And, you know, the straight razor and the brush and the soap kind of creates a foam instead of shaving cream. And at first the idea was just kind of a cool thing, kind of a fad thing. It seemed like, you know, I'm getting older, so, you know, why not be, you know, the old wise man sitting, you know, in a leather chair and drinking a scotch, and you know, I shave with the old time razor. But it quickly became actually better for me, and better, I mean, literally better for my face. And that, you know, this is, again, I'll connect this. This is going somewhere, because not only is it a better shave, at least for me, it actually, the steps you have to take in order to ensure you don't cut yourself with this very sharp straight razor, the steps you have to take in prepping your skin and prepping the foam and the soap and everything, there's a lot involved in that. Just, I mean, right now I have a beard. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, first thanks, but you can see I'm not really, I've had this beard going since last November. And so now it's just really just, you know, the below on my neck, but it still creates a smoother shave. It gets closer to the skin. And the reason I bring that up is because if you were to think of what is the modern way to shave, well, that's certainly not it, right? It's not a Gillette razor or a Schick razor with 4 or 5 blades on it in that little buffering thing before the blades or after the blades that helps to keep it smooth and helps to not cut your skin. All those things, those are, people spent time to develop that, right? That was an invention at some point, well beyond the straight razor. So you would not think of, you know, innovation in shaving and think of this razor that I use. But it doesn't mean that the straight razor isn't actually better, and for multiple reasons. So those of you that know me know I love technology, and I'm a big advocate of trying new things and the use of technology. I make a joke sometimes, you know, for those of you who you know, share a lot of things on Facebook telling about how good the old days were. You know, I always kind of say, well, you know, do you have an outhouse behind your house? No, you use the toilet, right? So the old days weren't always so good. But in this case, I think it is. And I think in the case of technology, when it comes to social media and texting and our ability as human beings to interact with one another and gain the trust of each other, has been completely eroded by these tools. And I'll touch on it later with when I get into a little bit about the author, and I guess you'd call him kind of a self-help guru, Simon Sinek. Excuse me. He's a person that I pay a lot of attention to on social media with videos that he's published, and I read his books. I'm on his second book, Leaders Eat Last. And he talks a lot about, in a lot of different medium, from his books to his online content, about how trust He says trust, basically, he knows it can't be formed in a day or two, and he knows it doesn't take as long as 7 years. But it's certainly not something that happens quickly. You know, in this day and age where we flip on any kind of streaming service and we get any show we want right away. We order something that we want from Amazon or from any other website, maybe Wayfair, haha, and we get that immediately. And so we're used now to technology giving us things instantaneously, but none of that actually gives us trust. And all of these things just help to further divide us, especially in this time of such a polarizing sort of era in the country. And so let's talk about that for a little bit. So a few things I wanted to bring up. The first one is I was on LinkedIn just a couple days ago. And first, let me pause there. So for those of you that happen to notice that I kind of promoted that this episode would be last weekend, let me be totally honest and say I ended up doing something that I basically intended never to do, which was re-record the episode, because after watching the episode, there's a topic I want to cover later that I kept mispronouncing, and it just looked really bad. And I ended up in a week's time actually adding more content. I think I was just very tired that day, and I kind of rushed into recording the episode because as I talked about actually in the first recording of it, I am excited to get back. It's obviously been a long time since I posted an episode. So with that being said, I am happy to be back, and I have more content to go over, and I also have some new equipment, and I'm working on getting some equipment and software that might actually help me stream this live if I wanted to do that. And so that would actually prevent me from ever being able to kind of redo an episode, because I think to fall down that slippery slope is to be dishonest in the idea of the entire podcast. And if I ever get that way, I'll just shut the whole thing down. So yeah, this is a re-recording of episode 5, and it is basically a weekend late. So, all right, back to what I was saying. So I was scrolling through LinkedIn earlier this week, and LinkedIn is kind of it's kind of the final frontier of social media. And at least the people that I'm connected with, and especially my coworkers at my real job, remember I do have a real career, which the topics that I talk about here have nothing to do with that company, and they're all my own. But I do have that real job, but I do have a lot of connections, fairly good amount of connections, and usually it is strictly business. Almost all the time it's strictly business. And even in today's day and age, it has usually been strictly business. So posts about business and what they're doing, even businesses talking about COVID-19 and what they're doing, especially the healthcare groups talking about their groups or their employees and talking about what they're doing to help patients, etc. But also companies like mine that are talking about technology. A lot of companies are going to working from home, and they of course need different ways of doing that because maybe some companies weren't prepared to do that. But I came across a post on LinkedIn that I think it was back, from July 4th. So, it's just another one of these newsfeed algorithms that took me to a later post, but had quite a bit of reactions, and it was basically a picture of the Declaration of Independence. And this was a CEO, I forget the company name, and he posted something about the time frame back in the 1700s, and he talked about the people who signed it, and it was meant to be a positive, uplifting sort of post where he talked about the founding of the country. And I saw that there were, I think, around 94 comments. And it's just that same kind of gut reaction you get now on Facebook or on Twitter. And you see that many comments on a post like that. And given the, what's going on in the country with COVID-19 and the shutdowns and the quarantines and the George Floyd and the protests and all these things, I thought, no, surely not on LinkedIn, right? But no, when I opened the comments, it was what you see in the country now. So it was, you can call it right and left, Republican, Democrat, whatever you want to call it, but it was a lot of people instantly talking about how the folks that were mentioned that signed the Declaration of Independence and how many slaves they owned. And then there were people talking about why that's relevant in today's society and what that has to do with the intentions of the post itself. And, it became a debate about basically what everything else is turning into these days, a debate about inequality among races and inequality among the dispossessed or the oppressed and the oppressors. And it was just sad to see on LinkedIn something like that. Because usually on LinkedIn, if not just for the sake of being careful, because this is a place where you are, you are representing your employer in most cases, or if you're unemployed, you're trying to get a job. And unfortunately, in this case, that didn't stop anybody. And I didn't take the time to look to see what companies people worked for, that sort of thing. But that's the sort of thing that this day and age, people screenshot that. I mean, you never know, but people still had, I don't know if you'd say the guts or the lack of the guts, I don't know, to say exactly what they were feeling. And it was this huge divide that you could see represented on LinkedIn of all places. And let's talk about that for just a second. And again, I'm trying to make sense of this myself. So I want everyone to think about this, because I'll point to this a little later, in that a lot of the people I've ended up kind of following and paying attention to, not a lot of them, but I think a surprisingly high amount, are evolutionary biologists. And you'll hear them talk about, when they say, quote unquote, a long time, they're talking about 1,000 years minimum, usually something like that. And because they're talking about evolution and kind of how human beings of any shape, size, color, or background, how they evolved from thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, to what we are today. And how are those things coded kind of in our DNA, in our behavior, and also how that relates to other mammals and other animals, how that's coded. So the reason I bring that up is because when we're looking at something like the Declaration of Independence, and the people that signed it, and kind of that era, that time where I think most of us know what that time represented. You had a group of people that were fighting for their independence from a group of or from a monarch in Britain. But of course, yes, that era, many white people owned slaves. And that's a fact of history. My question, I guess, is, can we really look at those times through the lens of 2020? because you can look at most eras that are 200, 300, 400, 500 years, 1,000 years old. And can't you always look through today's lens and say, wow, the atrocities of this time are so awful that if those folks existed today, obviously, they would be considered the most reprehensible individuals ever to live. And you'd want them, rounded up and put in jail and or executed. And I'm talking about, so for instance, if you haven't watched the show Outlander, first of all, it's just a good show. But second of all, for me, what surprised me the most is their willingness to kind of, and they wove this theme into, the writing on the show and the purpose of the show. But it was basically the atrocities of, I think it was the 1600s, and just the general carnal nature about how men looked at women. I mean, just take that interaction alone, and there were basically these civilized men that women could come across and not fear for their safety, fear to be captured, fear to be raped. They were actually few and far between. Most men, if you weren't, and this is why women at that time, had to be married after, when they were, 16 to 18, because if they were single and in adulthood and they didn't still live at home, they had no shot. They couldn't just roam the countryside and go about their day, and they couldn't get jobs. None of that. I mean, the ones who were really smart were viewed as witches, and just certain advancements in even medical technology could put you in danger of being burned at the stake because you're a witch. And of course, looking at those times through the lens of today, you would say that you cannot celebrate any men of that time. All men of that time were evil oppressors, and none of them can be celebrated. And, if they lived today, you would consider them the most reprehensible people on the face of the planet. And I guess my point is, haven't we made any progress since these times? Haven't we made any progress since the 1700s? Since the 1600s? Since 1920s? Since the 1960s? Surely we've made some progress, right? Is our goal some perfect utopia where everyone gets along, everyone's treated equally, everyone has equal opportunity, and there's equal outcomes for everybody? Is that truly our goal? That kind of perfect utopia? Because I question if that's ever even possible. Will everybody always be equal? Or ever be equal? Is that even possible? Can we eradicate all people that are racist and totally abolish racism and inequality and people that seek to oppress others because they feel they are better than them? Is it possible to get rid of all these people and all these thoughts? I don't know. From the people that I follow and pay attention to, it's not possible. And if you can't have a discussion with that, if I'm instantly part of the oppressors and part of the racists or part of the white supremacists or the Nazis, just because I say that that perfect utopia society is unattainable, then, and you're not willing to listen to what I had to say next, then I think you're part of the problem. Because I would tend to think that perfect utopian society is certainly not possible, but it doesn't mean we can't get better. It doesn't mean we don't have room to improve. Having room to improve is different than never having changed in the first place. And I think that's a very important distinction. And so other examples of this drastic polar divide we have right now. So if you go to Twitter and you just search the word Portland, Oregon, where if you don't know what's going on in Portland, Oregon, you might want to look it up. But if you just search that word and scroll through the latest search results on Twitter, you get a huge difference in opinions and thoughts and posts. And you have anywhere from abolish the police to people that say, or they're saying that DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and the federal government are being sued, and rightfully so, for sending in federal troops, to those that say, well, you got what you asked for. And it's very hard to see any middle ground, because you can find a post here that says, get your goons out of Portland, you ass clown. And it's replying to a DHS Twitter account. And I'll bet if I open that, you'll be able to find the responses to some of these. And it's just one shot, over the bow after another, back and forth. There is no room for discussion in these type of times, especially on social media, especially on Twitter, where I know they've expanded their character account that you're allowed to post, and you can certainly do posts that are threads, tweets that are replies to other tweets as you scroll down. But it's still no place for truthful, honest dialogue where we can discuss topics, very important, very polarizing topics, and find out that maybe there are more places where we agree than where we disagree. Because on Twitter and on social media and these type of posts, all you're seeing is the divide growing further and further and further apart. And both sides getting to the point where they're picking a side, they're so far divided from the other side, quote unquote, that they're willing to fight for it. They're willing to fight to make sure their side wins. And then there's another topic I wanted to bring up. So someone sent this to me and mentioned this to me about how masks being, if you're forced to wear masks, it's a restriction on your freedom. And not only that, I heard that it was basically helping to further the cause of facial recognition tracking software helped to track all Americans eventually, and masks were helpful in doing this. And they would now with COVID help to track who you've been in contact with, right? It's this contact tracing idea. And I had to look this up and see, again, this is kind of this is another very polarizing topic. It seems to be if you would call yourself left-leaning, however strong that is, then you're usually somebody that would say you're fine with wearing masks and everyone should wear masks, and you're fine with them being mandatory in stores and in cities and that sort of thing. And if you would say that you kind of lean right, however, wherever you fall on that that sliding scale, then you would typically be one to say that you'd rather not wear a mask, to it's I'm definitely not wearing a mask, to it's an infringement on my freedom, and look here, it's just another way to put us under the thumb of the federal government and those who seek to limit our freedoms and track our every movement. So it's not completely wrong. And so here's an article on Forbes.com that talks about facial recognition firms pitch COVID-19 immunity passports for America and Britain. So you immediately think, well, that's pretty vanilla, right? It's something to do with travel, which we already have to get our pictures taken and show IDs and prove we're not a terrorist, basically, to get on a plane. And of course, starting in 2021 in America, you have to have those real IDs where you have to take in so much extra documentation to the DMV to prove you are who you say you are, and get that little star on your driver's license. So, I mean, first question, are we okay with all that? Are we okay with the real ID and the extra steps that they're making us take? Well, this talks about basically a startup company called Face First, located in California, and they've been in business for 13 years. But now they're promoting this idea of a coronavirus immunity registry. And this would be a database run by the medical providers. So safe enough, right? So it's not the government, it's run by medical providers. Medical providers, at least most of the time, are private companies. Okay. So it will feed to a smartphone app with your immunity status. Just as your iPhone opens, if you show your face, the app will verify it's you by using your face. The app will also tell employers and border control staff more about a person's experience of COVID-19, says the CEO, Peter Trepp. It will know what kind of test you received in case it was a defective one. It will include a record of whether you've been near infected folk or not. And it will note if you've had an antibody test as well. So, and you can find other stories about other firms trying to promote their facial recognition in light of COVID, at least for the purpose of contact tracing. So, unfortunately, I know somebody who just recently was at a barbecue at their 4th of July, on 4th of July at their house, and their brother-in-law was infected at the time, didn't know it, was at the party, and this person I know got sick, and by the time he was going to the doctor the Friday after, gotten a call from the Indiana Department of Health saying, hey, you've been in contact with somebody who is tested positive. And so that is kind of basic form of contact tracing where, the other person was sick and he was asked where he had been, probably in the last week or so, and who he had been in contact with, and gave them their names and phone numbers, and those people were contacted. Excuse me. So, are we okay with that form of contact tracing? And then are we okay with contact tracing done with technology that at the very least stores a picture of you, and your face can be read and tied to, your name and your information, and then pull back, if you've been in contact with anybody, if you have that have been known to be tested positive or tested negative, if you've tested positive or negative, and that sort of thing. And then you might start to think, well, does that mean they're going to employ this sort of, technology in the streets, in the city streets? You'd be walking down the street, and if you're close to somebody, does the camera recognize both of you? And does it already know who you are because it recognized your face and your face is in some sort of registry? And that's where you can really easily fall down a rabbit hole and say, well, is my face already in a registry? If I'm opening my cell phone with my face, are you sure that in your Apple or Google terms of use, acceptable use policy, that you didn't agree for that information to be used in some way? I don't know. I don't know that these aren't good questions to ask, though. And again, it's another topic where you can find a huge divide. And I'm going back to the masks, huge divide on whether or not they are a good thing and whether or not it's a restriction on our freedom. And then we go back to Twitter, and something that caught my eye last week, where you have this selective use of information on Twitter and social media by, the mainstream media outlets. And so this was a post by the USA Today, and they basically took it upon themselves and said, here is the claim. The claim was the Trump campaign shirts feature the imperial eagle, which is a Nazi symbol. And they had a picture of a man with with this supposed Trump campaign shirt with the eagle. This is America First. And then the imperial eagle statue, I believe it looks like it's sitting behind Adolf Hitler in what's probably a speech. And they said, our ruling on this fact check, true. And so it's like, well, thanks, USA Today. I appreciate that. I mean, did anybody ask for this fact check? I don't know. Is it helpful information? So are we saying here that Trump is using Nazi symbology right under our noses and we should be afraid of that? Well, if you just keep scrolling, you have, well, the first one I see is, oops, fake news. USA Today says Trump campaign t-shirts feature Nazi eagle, but Speaker Pelosi uses the same Nazi eagle, quote unquote, on her website. And, it's not even really Nancy Pelosi's symbol. It's the speaker. It's the seal of the speaker, stamped 1789 in the United States House of Representatives. And it's just this flat eagle symbol, with the head kind of cocked really one way or the other. And then you find out, well, this is the same eagle on the back of the quarter. And you actually then find where USA Today responded to their own tweet and said, clarification, the claim that Trump 2020 has put on a t-shirt with a symbol similar to a Nazi eagle and is being criticized for it is true. Worth noting, the eagle is a longtime U.S. symbol too. Well, come on, guys. I mean, what the hell are you doing? And, I was watching for the second time, or maybe even the third time, one of Joe Rogan's podcasts where he had Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein on. I'm actually not done with it, but I was watching some of it this morning. And this is a 2-year-old podcast. And there's a lot of the things they're talking about. They're talking about, the polar divide. and the chaos that our society is in. And they're talking about this, framing it 2 years ago, and how it's so unstable. And there was a something, I forget what it was exactly, but it was something like this, where that whoever, there's probably a few people involved in a post like that, right? There's maybe the writer, the journalist, quote unquote, who thought it was important to check this out and perform this fact check for us. And there was the social media folks and maybe the editor, who all decided it was a good idea to write this up in a way that framed Trump's campaign T-shirts as relating to a Nazi symbol. And let me just go back to the original post. 7,800 comments, 3,900 retweets, 3,800 likes. That's, in Twitter world, that's just a little heart on the tweet. And so in Twitter, they don't have like what Facebook has. If you're not familiar with Twitter, they don't have a like and an angry face and a sad face and a now I care symbol and a love face and all that. All they have is a little heart. So you could make the rational argument that if you clicked the little heart and said like, then you appreciated the post, as in it was informative. It told me something I didn't know already. It was a good piece of journalism. And if you liked that post and didn't come away thinking that either affirmed what you already believed to be true, that Trump's inevitably a Nazi, or that it helped to kind of, solidify what you maybe were already thinking, or it told you something new that you hadn't thought of before, and you believed it to be true and factual and newsworthy, which is a term I think is completely lost in today's day and age. Is that really newsworthy? If you walked away thinking that, or if you clicked that like button, you probably walked away thinking, one of those things or a variation of them. And how sad is that? Again, I don't care if you like Trump or if you like Joe Biden or if you're independent or if you don't care about any of this. Somebody took the time to post this, and let's say this all collapses, like many of us, or many people, I would say, think it might. And when I say collapses, I mean we divulge into civil war as a society. There'll be people that will be able to stake a claim saying, hey, yeah, I posted that, I played a part in furthering this divide and proving that if I can lump this group of people, Trump and everyone who likes him, into this little box, this little group, and forget about any of their individuality, then I can say they must go away. I can make the case that they need to be fought, and they need to be defeated by all means necessary. Okay? Well, again, good for you, USA Today. Because there are also other posts, responses to this, saying, okay, well, again, this has been used throughout American history. It's on the back of the quarter. But here's another little fact check for you. And a lot of people pointed to Black Lives Matter using this little fist symbol that you can find almost an exact variation of in Soviet Russia and some of their flags and some of their propaganda. Okay, well, maybe next week USA Today will have that fact checked, right? But again, further the divide. So I guarantee you there were those, I'm not scrolling through all the comments, but we all know. We open that and we see the 7,800 comments. There's going to be shots from the right and shots from the left. Oh yeah, I knew it. Trump was a Nazi. Oh, you're a Nazi? Well, Nancy Pelosi's a Nazi. Look at her symbols. You know, and the media is the enemy of the people. Ever see the backside of a quarter? Um, People posting the presidential seal from the FDR era on the front of a podium. Um, And in a post, here's one again, a shot from the left. With all the dog whistles and more egregious racist rhetoric Trump has used, do we really believe that he and his campaign are above using Nazi imagery? If it were to stand on its own without his divisive rhetoric, we could say it's just an eagle, but coupled with everything else. So now somebody, even with all of the other things said about how it's pretty much used throughout American history, now because of everything else Trump is supposed to have said, all of his Nazi type rhetoric and racist type rhetoric, well, that supports the claim that that's why he's using it, is because he's a Nazi at heart. So, what did USA Today to bring it do? What did USA Today do in that case to bring us together? And all the people that reacted, what did you do to bring us together? So, what matters in our elections this year? What truly matters? Is it the president? Is it your governor? Is it the U.S. House and the Senate, U.S. Congress? Or is it your state House and Senate, your state level Congress? I mean, I would say that your state representatives, your local county representatives, your city representatives do more to impact your everyday life than the President of the United States. And I would say the members of Congress do more to impact your life than the President of the United States. But we've gotten, we are where we are. We're in 2020, and we're in this space where we have two candidates. We have, just like we do every year, the Republican and the Democrat. And both sides are doing everything they can to beat the other guy and to get their guy elected. And on the Democratic side, with all the talk of diversity and inclusion, and you get the CNN posts where they point out that the coronavirus task force, the White House, only has a few people that aren't white. They get that kind of focus. And out of all the candidates on the Democratic side, you get the oldest and the whitest guy there. And, what's different? What's changed, guys? In 4 years, what is different? Trump's president, so if you're a Republican, and you define yourself that way, well, your guy's president. That's about the only difference. 4 years ago, Obama was leaving, so it was essentially anybody's game. But really, is it anybody's game? Or are we back where we were 4 years ago, and 4 years before that, and 4 years before that, and 4 years before that? Are you really satisfied with your Republican candidate for president, or your Democrat candidate for president? Or are you really saying, my guy's the lesser of the two evils? Do you really know what your guy stands for and what your guy believes in? Do you really believe whatever they say they believe in? Or are they tied to some sort of power struggle? Are they trying to win just to beat the other side and keep control out of the hands of the other side? Well, let's talk about something. So here we get to the part where I mispronounced this word constantly last week when I recorded this episode the first time. So I'll say it clearly and enunciate, if not for myself. So if you haven't heard of this, I need everyone to look at Unity 2020. Unity 2020, you might say, could become a third political party. I cringe to even say those words. But Unity 2020 could be really a party of the people. And, you say, well, all the Democrats are people and all the Republicans are people and those are parties of the people, or my parties of the people already. That's fine. That's fine. You can make those claims. But if you want to make those claims, I would first ask you to look into both sides, Republicans, Democrats. Maybe not Trump. I don't know. I think Trump did get elected with at least most of his money financing his campaign. And again, 100%, I voted for Trump because I could call myself part of that group. I was a Republican before I was me. And this is the whole point, is I want you to be individuals and think for yourselves and make your own decisions. So before you say, well, my guy and my party is a party of the people and I don't need another party of the people, I want you to truly be able to say that you know what your Republican or your Democrat representatives are beholden to, especially the ones that have been in Congress or in politics for decades. Do they truly represent you and your family and your area to the best of their ability? Are they just an extension of you and your beliefs? And that's why they're in your party, and that's why you're in that party, and that's why you vote for them in your district or in your Senate seat or for, the president? Or are there potential nefarious things at play here? How many of these people are taking money from entities that do not serve your best interests or the best interests of the people they represent? How many of them are just in office to stay in office? And how many of them, their efforts only go every year or every 4 years to staying in office, staying in power? Because just the fact alone that we're so concerned about the president should be something that really scares everybody. Because again, the president alone in that office, we have all these fancy terms, right? The leader of the free world, the most powerful man on the planet, all these things. But at the end of the day, that's a title given to the position or the person that the people have put in place, right? And if not doing a good job, we replace you in 4 years. So you get 4 years to do what we asked you to do, and if not, you're out of there. That should be a position that holds very little power, but in today's political game, holds a lot of power, especially when your president is on Twitter and people are hanging on his every word and treating it like news stories. So this is where the people deserve to have options. And none of this is an endorsement for these candidates that I'm about to talk about. But there is a groundswell of movement that is trying to be pushed out around the country around this Unity 2020 plan. So let's talk about it real quick. So Brett Weinstein first unveiled this on Joe Rogan's podcast. Now, of course, he did that for a reason, because Joe Rogan is probably the largest media outlet in the world, right? And there's a reason for that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But he unveiled this plan on Joe's podcast where, Brett talked about a lot of things. He talked about COVID because Brett's an evolutionary biologist, and he made some very interesting points about COVID that you should check out this episode. And he talked about his own research when he was a grad student and some very, very surprising things he found out about lab mice. But he also unveiled his Unity 2020 plan. And the idea is that this is a movement that drafts two patriots, one from center left and one from center right. And the two will govern in tandem, in agreement. All decisions will be made together except for those decisions that absolutely must be made by one person. And one will be the president to start, and when they run for a re-election, they will switch. The agreement is they will switch. Whoever was vice president becomes the president on the ticket, and they will keep doing that, keep switching until one of them is no longer eligible and they've served at least 8 years. And he mentioned a couple candidates. So his thoughts initially were from center left, Andrew Yang. And he talks about Andrew Yang in the sense that Andrew Yang played a good political game when he was in the Democratic race for president, but he believes that Andrew Yang comes from a place of truth, and he genuinely wants to help the American people. And Andrew Yang believes what he says. I tend to agree with him about Andrew Yang. Most of what Andrew Yang talks about, I don't really agree with. But that's okay, guys. That's okay. You know, that doesn't mean Andrew Yang needs to be shut down, needs to be not included in discussions. And this idea, when you pair a guy like Andrew Yang with the center-right candidate who was Admiral William McRaven, who, when Brett mentioned that, I had no idea who he was talking about. But if you look into him, he's a retired admiral. He's someone that he was in the Navy, a naval admiral, and he was involved in the raid on bin Laden. He commanded it. He helped plan it. I forget exactly what it was. The idea here is not for me to go through all this. I want you to look it up. Look up Unity 2020, Andrew Yang, William McRaven. Those are the initial thoughts. These two have not come out and campaigned for some kind of Unity 2020 ticket or political party. That's not the idea. The idea is the candidates are drafted through the overwhelming will of the people. So just real quick, think about real hard, close your eyes even. It's November 2020. It's a couple days after the election. And Joe Biden was elected. What does the country look like? Or it's the same time and Donald Trump was elected. What does the country look like? So even if you are sold on one of those guys and you believe they are honest in whatever they say they believe in and your beliefs align with theirs and you believe they are the right person, even if you believe all that, I still strongly urge you to look into the Unity 2020 idea, because I don't know if the country can survive either of those candidates being elected. The country as we know it, I don't know. And so I'm actually getting personally involved in this. I volunteered to help. Again, not so sure I'm going to vote for one of these people. I don't know yet. This is all part of me trying to make up my mind and also trying to give me options to pick from. So I'm involved with their Facebook group. There's a Slack channel that they have that I'm part of. Everybody was asked to, if there wasn't one already, create a Facebook group for your particular city. And so there's a main kind of national Facebook group. And so I created the Unity 2020 Indianapolis page, or a group. The idea is just to get this whole movement out there, just to get people aware of it. That's it. And that's all I'm trying to do here. So you can look at these pages. You can go to articlesofunity.org or .com. They both go to the same site, and you can read through there. There's some quick videos that kind of lay out the whole idea. You can look at Brett Weinstein on Joe Rogan's podcast, on his own podcast, the Dark Horse podcast, and he was also on a YouTube channel called The Hill TV, and this is all right here. The Hill TV, where he has it's a good little 12-minute shortened version of the idea, because he had time to kind of put more of it together, and also had a lot more questions that he was able to answer. So take a look at that. Also, through all this process, if you go to the Truth and Dialogue Twitter account, you can see I did a poll on Twitter shortly after this idea was released. And knowing that Brett, he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and the millions of people that see that every day, I wanted to get a quick sense of what people were thinking. So I basically said, if you're voting today, who would you vote for? Trump, Biden, the Unity 2020 pair, or you're not voting. So look at the results. They're interesting. But it was also interesting, one of the responses I got. Somebody said, well, what about Jo Jorgensen? And I thought, well, what about Jo Jorgensen? Who the hell is Jo Jorgensen? And come to find out, well, she's an independent candidate for president. Libertarian candidate, for president. And she's a psychologist, a senior lecturer at Clemson University, proud mother and grandmother and hockey player. That's her bio on Twitter. And I don't know if she's got any kind of shot. I don't know much about her. I have invited her to be on the podcast and to try to, again, not to say, here's the person that I endorse, but it's just really to say, here's an option, guys. And I don't know how many people in the Midwest and around Indiana and around these states would even know who this person is. I didn't know who she was. And so I responded to that response and said, I honestly didn't know. It's funny when you Google who are the candidates for the 2020 presidential election, it's funny what the results you get. Because I didn't get her. And I actually, in one search, I didn't even get Donald Trump. So that's a whole other topic, Google's bias or non-bias, in the political landscape. But yeah, so now I follow her on Twitter, again, trying to get a sense, kind of, bring in all the information, try to make an informed choice, because I'm telling you, I don't know. I really don't know if Trump wins, if, Democrats, the left, whatever you want to call, anybody who doesn't like Trump, I don't know how they'll take it. And those of you who are Republican, lean right, and you're against Joe Biden, how are you going to take it? I don't know. I don't think it'll be good. So all hope is lost, right? This Unity 2020 thing, it's a last-ditch effort. Jo Jorgensen has no shot. My guy's going to win, or my guy's going to win, and screw the other side, right? And if they want a civil war, we'll give it to them. All hope is lost. I don't care. Well, I don't believe so, guys. And I think if you, again, start to extract yourself from this kind of groupthink and take a break from social media, take a break from any mainstream media sources, because I'm telling you, the places to get information nowadays, it's not CNN, it's not Fox News, it's not MSNBC, it's not ABC, NBC, CBS, Vox, which is part of NBC, the Washington Post, the New York Times, USA Today, all these entities we call the mainstream media. It's just not where to get the news. It's just not. Because they're all biased in some way or the other, whether or not they say it. So if you follow them, if you listen to them, or if you engage in these arguments on social media with the people that, oppose your side, then I would see where you might think, well, screw you, we're going to beat your guy, and if that leads to civil war, so be it. But if you pay attention to the people that I do, and you try to disseminate this information for yourself, and really focus in on these long form discussions and dialogues, and find people that disagree with each other that are having a dialogue. Find people, yourself that you disagree with. Shut the hell up for a minute and let them talk, unless they're trying to scream at you. But if you have somebody willing to listen and willing to engage in calm dialogue, whether or not you disagree with them, that's where we're going to find this middle ground. That's where we're going to find a place for the country to move forward. And that's, so I follow people like Simon Sinek. Like I said, I mentioned I'm on his second book, Leaders Eat Last. And he focuses so heavily on leadership. And it's funny the things he talks about. Now, this is a book that's a few years old, and obviously he wrote it, a few years before that, I'm sure. Or it took, a couple years to write. But he talks about things that, he relates a lot of his leadership philosophies into the biology of humans and in the chemical mix in our brains. So he talks a lot about the natural order of things from a historical perspective. He talks a lot about hierarchies and how hierarchies are a natural part of any modern society. And how leaders are those that look to take, they're not, people that have a certain position or have a certain title, but they're those that look to take care of those to the left and those to the right of them. And they look to help people play the game of the hierarchy and advance from the bottom to the top and show them the way. And then you think about, or look to the, sort of these other people I follow. So I'm almost going to list the entire quote unquote intellectual dark web here, but it's Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, Eric Weinstein, Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris, Joe Rogan. There are other people that I'll watch and listen to, but if I open a YouTube video, and first of all, I look at the length, and if it's 10 minutes or less, I'm weary of that. It kind of alarms me. I think, well, is there anything of value, unless this is a cat video or some comedian, or I watch these videos of these guys out in the Cambodian jungle building these crazy underground like pools and slides and stuff. But I'm talking about like serious content that you're looking to, because the title grabs you and you want to watch that and or listen to that and glean anything from it. You want to learn anything from this because it's interesting, it's newsworthy maybe. If it's 10 minutes or less, I would caution against that. There are safe spaces. I even hate to say that word. There are safe videos. Let me rephrase that. Safe videos where you have like Joe Rogan, he releases clips from his videos. And that's really just to entice you to watch the full 1 to 3 hour discussion with these people. And everyone I listed on that, just before, Jordan Peterson down to Joe Rogan, they all have their own podcast. And all of them are just a variation of the same format, sitting down, reviewing a topic in honest pursuit of the truth, either with, by themselves or with some guest on their show. And there's so much you can learn from people like this. And not just necessarily what they know, but just the information that kind of bubbles up from two individuals discussing it. And sometimes they surprise themselves, and sometimes they surprise, one person surprises the other. And sometimes you get a topic that doesn't interest you and you don't find it to be helpful at all. And that's going to happen. But that's the beauty of YouTube and any other streaming service, which mostly it's YouTube, right? That's the beauty. You can stop that. You can swipe it down, find another one. And that's why Joe Rogan is such an easy place to start, because he's the biggest there is, right? He's now signed this big deal with Spotify. But because he's the biggest there is, he can get anybody on that show that he wants. And you'll go from an episode with Dave Rubin or Ben Shapiro or Sam Harris or one of these other guys, and then he'll have an MMA fighter. And then he just had last week a guy talking about the benefits of nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, of all things, right? But it was fascinating, and you'd be surprised what you can learn from some of these things. So start there if this is not something you're used to, and this is not a place you're used to getting information from. But stay away from quick snippets of someone, that is going over some kind of headline topic. Even somebody you might usually trust, it's from one of these mainstream media outlets. Just, be careful with that, because you'd be very surprised how quickly your mind starts to change when you start kind of getting out of watching that kind of content and start watching these just simple, honest discussions. You'd really be amazed. And so that's kind of where I'll leave you. I really think there is a path forward that doesn't involve a revolution. And because I would ask everyone this, and this is a very serious question. You may think that revolution is the best way forward, but don't think for a second that guarantees that your side is going to win. Be careful what you ask for, because you may be in a really tough spot, and you may have people that are in a really tough spot, especially with the pandemic and the shutdowns and the economy dropping off because everybody's out of work, or everybody's, nobody's doing anything. And I get it. I really do. And you may be fed up and saying, enough is enough. If I don't get my guy elected and we get this country moving in a different direction, there's going to be hell to pay, and the revolution is the best way to go. Be very careful. Be very careful. That may not come out the way you want. And if that happened, no matter which side won, however long that took and however many lives would be lost, this would be a much different country. And if you think that all hope is lost, I want you to look backward and really look at the past and look at where societies in a civilized fashion where they've been and how far we've come. And really think if America is such a lost, terrible place. Or are we maybe the best version of a Western society that the world's ever seen? We're never going to be perfect. We always have room to improve. But I don't think that means you should tear it all down. And so with that, I thank you for listening. Thanks for watching on YouTube. Check us out on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Facebook and Twitter, and check out Unity 2020. I'm not saying you have to vote for them, but get involved. And if you like what you hear, get involved to the point of joining these Facebook groups, checking out the websites, following them on Twitter and Facebook, because maybe you don't want to vote for these people, but maybe your neighbor or your friends deserve the option, because maybe they don't believe that the only way forward is this guy in the Republican side or this guy in the Democratic side. So we deserve an option. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.